You're listening to Daniel W. Shrigley's Survival Talk Radio, the official survival talk radio of America's Survival Son. Come and learn survival.
Survive this.
Hey, this is Dan Shrigley. You're joining us today. Our topic will be basically navigation, direction finding. So if you're lost and stranded and you're in the wilderness and maybe you're out hiking on a day hike, went to Yosemite, took the off beaten path and kind of realized, hey, which way did we come from? How do we get out of here? So we're going to talk about some critical skills for direction finding, and that is called cardinal direction finding. All right, cardinal direction finding is really simple. It's basically your north, east, south, and west. Now, to do direction finding, what you might want to do is look for terrain features or landmarks. Terrain features and landmarks are things that are commonly seen or identified that stick out in the terrain that you look at in the outline of the landscape that you're in. So when you're looking around before you enter into an environment, it's really smart to try to identify key terrain features and identifying signature marks of those terrain features. So if you notice that there's a huge mountain in the backdrop, you want to kind of watch the geography of that mountain so you know the cuts, curves, angles, draws, ridges and things like that, snow caps, just little things about that mountain so you can tell if you're on the original side that you're on or if you've changed sides of the mountain, if you went to the left or the right, or otherwise east, west, south, north side of the mountain. So when you're looking to identify things that you can use as triggers or identifying marks to help you realize where you're at, you want to look for things that are permanent, not temporary. So rivers are okay, but maybe seasonal streams and creeks would not be okay. You don't really want to pick a tree unless it's the only tree out there, because as you get into the thick of other trees, you're going to lose it. So basically, when it comes down to direction finding, you really want to take advantage of the terrain around you. But that's not the only way to do direction finding, because in navigation, the universe is set. The Earth sits in a certain spot within the universe inside our solar system, and it's set like clockwork. So that's how we navigate around the planet, or the surface of this planet, very easily and very accurately, because it's set like clockwork. So to know north, east, south, or west, the other trigger for you would be to know the direction for which the sun rises and falls, and the line that travels across the sky. You can do this no matter if it's sunny or cloudy. You can also, if you're really good, do what's called celestial navigation. But there's certain rules that you have to follow when you're doing celestial navigation versus day land navigation or whatever. So knowing where the sun rises and where the sun falls just eliminated all your worries. But sometimes people have a hard time finding that and understanding where that is, especially on cloudy days. So there's some triggers for you when it is 11 o'clock in the morning to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You've been spunked around. You look up in the sky. I don't know if it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock by looking at the sun. I think it's dead center in the sky, but I really can't tell. It depends on your hemisphere. So to alleviate that, there's the shadow tip method or shadow stick method. It just depends on where you're from. But either way, it's the same method. Shadow tip, shadow stick, watch dial method, whatever. But what you're using is the traveling distance of the tip of a shadow in a circular circumference that goes around clockwise. All right, and you use this in 15-minute increments. So it's much like a watch dial. And what you do is you mark the starting point of the tip of the shadow after you put a shadow casting instrument or stick into the ground. And then you mark the tip of the shadow and you wait for that shadow. You wait for 15 minutes. Hopefully you have a watch or use your best guess. All right. And then you put a rock or a marker device at the end of the tip after 15 minutes to mark the two different points, start and end. Then you draw a line, center mass, from the center or the bottom base of your shadow casting instrument or your stick to the middle of the line that these two rocks have created from rock to rock at the end where the shadow tip drew that imaginary line. From that point, that will give you easily your northerly direction. Okay? It's giving you a cardinal direction. It's not giving you an accurate direction in mils, degrees, or magnetic or anything like that. It's just giving you basically a true north direction. Okay, so that is enough to give you an idea of where you should plot your next decisions to head to. So if you came from originally a southerly direction, society or civilization or park ranger station, campground or whatever it is that affects you, that you're trying to get back to, is in the southerly direction. Now you know you need to head the opposite direction of that shadow tip. So you do a about face and you walk the other way. But before you walk the other way, before you leave your little tool that you just made, you need to pick a terrain feature that you can identify and walk to in the distance. And periodically, if you lose that terrain feature, especially when you're losing daylight hour, you might want to recast that shadow just to make sure you're staying in a linear line and you're following the correct azimuth. Now, if you have a compass, which would be ideal for you, you can use the compass to give you, a proper, more accurate azimuth to follow versus a cardinal direction. Now we're doing using what's called degrees or mils. Okay, there's 6,400 mils in a circle, so it's basically 360 degrees makes a circle, but there's 6,400 mils in a circle, which is broken down. The only time you're going to need to use mils is if you're trying to do accurate accuracy for distance and stuff related to machinery or mechanical devices. The military uses it all the time. They use it for ordnance and they use it for accurate weapons, engagement processes to effectively hit targets at great distances and accurately. So you don't need to worry about the mils, but the mils are there. They're on pretty much any compass. But what you might want to use is the simpler version, and that's the degrees. So you know that there's 360 degrees in a circle. You flip that backwards, now we're doing 180, and boom. So if you came from the south, you got your shadow tip that showed you the north. We want to hit 160 degrees, and we want to head back the other way. Okay? So that's if you're escaping to the south to go find rescue or self-rescue or whatever it is that you're looking for. Now, when you're looking for terrain features, it's really critical to pick major terrain features, not minor terrain features, and definitely not superficial terrain features, because things can change easily, and you want to take something that is going to stay. So a mountaintop is going to stay, but make sure it's a mountaintop that is stand out. You don't want to pick a hilltop and rolling hills like foothills or whatnot, and or a treetop, and you are in a bunch of trees, unless you plan on reshooting your azimuth continually. Okay, so to alleviate that, to make your travel more relaxed, I guess you could say, so you don't have to keep worrying about where am I, or where am I headed to, then you pick that major terrain feature and you march towards it. Another important aspect for you when you're doing traversing your terrain is keeping track of the distance that you've gone. So, to get a good idea of how far you've traveled, you're definitely going to want to keep your pace count. And so, typically, it's better if you don't know the accurate measurement for your pace count, pick a good number, 60 or 70 left foot or right foot steps. So every time your left foot hits the ground, that's a number, okay? Every time your right foot hits the ground, that's a number. So either pick your left foot or your right foot, but only pick one foot. Don't count the other one, okay? So if it's easier for you to count every time your left foot hits the ground as 1, 2, 3, you figure you're crossing between 3 to 5 feet every time you take a step with your left foot, right? So that gives you a gauge to count kind of how far you've moved from your start point, so you can keep an idea if you've walked 5 kilometers. We know there's 1.6 kilometers in a mile, so that's there's 1,600 meters in a mile, all right, or 1.6 kilometers. So 1,000 meters is a kilometer, all right. 1.6 kilometers is a mile, or 1,600 meters is in a kilometer, which is a mile, standard U.S. mile, all right. So now that you have the ability to track how far you've traveled, and if you don't have a predetermined measurement of distance, it's best to try to avoid standard measurements. You might want to stick with metric, because metric's a little easier to track, especially if you have the concept of metric. But if you don't have the concept of metric and all you do is understand the standard, then you understand a quarter mile, half mile, an eighth of a mile, and a mile, and feet. Okay, so the problem is it takes so many feet that make up a mile. You're not going to sit there and count the 5,000 feet. So it's easier on you to track meters, metric. Okay, it divides it into a third, so it's a lot easier, less counting involved with that. But you want to kind of have a feel, and if you've walked about a mile, a quarter mile, or a half a mile, instinctively you should kind of have a good feel about it. The distance isn't highly important. It's important, but it's not critical. What is critical is closing the gap between your target and where your position is. So every step forward is closing the gap. So close the gap and stay on track to your terrain feature that you've identified as your marker. All right, that will get you closer to your point of rescue. Okay, so the other thing is say you have zero ideology about where your start point or point of reference is to self-rescue. There's certain things you can look for to identify as that you're getting closer to civilization. So obviously a river, you're going to follow the river downstream. Okay, don't follow a river upstream, but follow downstream. Right, meaning if you throw a stick in the water and it floats away from you, and it's a river, you want to follow the direction that stick just took off. Okay, and why you might want to follow a stick is because man is a creature of habit, and man always surrounds bodies of water because we live off water. We use it for food, we use it for drinking, we use it for transportation. We use it for many things. We use it for more things than the average person might even realize. So staying next to a body of water is a safety blanket for you, because you can follow along the edge. And there'll be points in times, possibly, that you can't stay along the water's edge, so you have an option. And this is based off terrain, where terrain limits your ability to be close to the water's edge, or plant and vegetation limits your ability to be close to the water's edge, or whatever the obstacle might be that's preventing you. So you don't want to lose sight of your body of water, because rivers can change directions very fast. You might think you're walking around, I'm going to go to the left and walk up about a half mile and link back up with the river, but you don't know that in between that distance that you were going to do your link up, that river has done an S-turn, and it's done another S-turn. And by the time you realize that you're trying to get back to where you're expecting to meet back up with the river's not there, because it is now a mile away from you. So remember that bodies of water change directions. Water takes the path of least resistance. So as it's cutting through the valley, it changes. And in storms and floods, it does change. So even if you're familiar with the area, unless it's a major river that's stuck between canyons, don't expect that it didn't change or dry out in one part, but it does. Rivers can be seasonal too, where it's got a heavy flow in the wintertime, but in the summertime, it's hardly a trickle, right? And it's a river, right? So with your direction finding and you trying to achieve self-rescue, you definitely want to stay with the things that you know. So you know that a body of water is going to lead you back to civilization. You also know that, it would be a good idea, or you should know that it would be a good idea if you have the ability to, but write down important landmarks and terrain features. What are terrain features? Terrain features are mountaintops, draws, valleys, cliffs, saddles, ridges. Excuse me. Depressions. So all these terrain features, now you need to know what they look like. A depression is a hole in the ground, okay? Where a ridge is a bunch of, when you're looking down the outline of the mountaintop that goes across the landscape of the mountain, you see ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Those are ridges. Those are ridge lines, okay? Sometimes they're flat, and sometimes they're jagged, and sometimes they're hilly, okay? But those are ridges. Now, to break it down to a simpler component, is the downside on a ridge between the two high points, the two hilltops. But the downside is a saddle, because it looks like a saddle. You can sit on it, right? But it's a saddle or valley on top of the mountain, basically. But we call it a saddle, not a valley. All right, a valley is at the bottom of a mountain. All right, but for a layman, it's the downside. It's where the top of the hill goes down, comes back up, and goes back up to the top of the mountain, right? So that is the part that you would look for as maybe a potential place to cross over, so you're not climbing the top of the mountain. So when you're traversing terrain and you want to get around a mountain, obviously the safer route might be walk around the mountain, okay? However, time-consuming route might be to cross over the mountain, as long as the terrain isn't so critical, right? So it really comes to a judgment call about what the terrain is offering you as far as obstacles, and what your skill level is, and what tools you have available to you. So if you have rock mountain climbing gear, then you might be able just to climb the mountain, go over it, and come back down the other side. But if you have no gear, you don't have inappropriate footwear, you might have to take the longer way around, and that longer way around might take you some added time, but at least you know you're making it around safely. Your biggest threat there is paying attention to the directions you're traveling, but always keeping that mountaintop at either your left or right shoulder, all right? And being very aware of where it's at. So when you're trying to find your way out of a very critical situation that could be life-threatening to you, you want to do these things in a way that you're sane, your mental stability is intact, and you're not in a panic. So remember the psychology of survival. I've written articles about psychology of survival. on my blog. You can go read that up on danielshrigley.com. But when you're in this critical environment, this moment of time and space where you feel despair, helpless, and hopeless, remember, if you keep your wits about yourself, you won't be, okay? It's when you panic, you become. So let's eliminate fear, okay? Fear kills, and you will die if you get too panicked because of fear. Fear is a tool. We want to use fear to make us do the right thing. So, talking about fear briefly, fear is the thing that is the motivator for you to do things in a safe fashion, okay? So, if you have a fear of jumping out of an airplane because you think your chute might not open, or you're just afraid of the feeling of falling, then maybe you shouldn't be either, one, in an airplane, or two, jumping out it, all right? But if you're going to go, the best way to conquer fear is to face it and look it in the face and just go for it, all right? Conquering fear is good as long as it's done in a way that you're comfortable with and you're, getting your thrill, or you're beating a challenge. If you're in a life-threatening situation, as far as being lost or stranded, fear is going to lock you up. You're going to get more lost. You're going to get turned around. And you're not going to stop and think about the critical skills that you do know. You're going to brain dump it. So don't let fear brain dump you, okay? If you know how to find direction finding by using moss on a tree, that you know this moss grows towards the sunlight. I know that the sun travels across the east to the west, and so predominantly this tree gets more sun facing north, so the moss is going to grow towards the north more. So it's a lot of technology behind it. There's a lot of knowing your plants and your mosses and things like that, and how do trees grow, all right? Well, trees get affected by two things. They get affected by daylight, and they get affected by wind. So if you know you're high up in a location that gets a lot of wind, you're going to see that the trees tend to grow in the direction the wind is blowing it. So one side of the tree will be more bare, and the other side of the tree is where the branches are and the leaves. So that is a tree that has been, through its young life growing up, where the wind was constantly hitting it. All right, so it just grew that way. All right, the wind has a lot to do with it, and then sunlight. So if you're in a location where sunlight affects the growth of the tree, well, then you can kind of tell where it is thickest in foliage or leaves, or thicker in branches, and you can tell that that's where the tree grabs its sunlight from. So just knowing a little bit of science could really save your life and give you good, proper direction. So obviously, we would hope that you would have a compass. Obviously, we would hope you would have a map, and hopefully that would be an accurate map. So I always tell people, look, if you're going to carry a map on you, then you need to carry a precision map, a good, solid hiker's map, that is going to give you, direction, terrain features, elevation, bodies of water, seasonal. It's a color-coded map, too, that is drawn to scale, 25,000 over 100,000 or 50,000 over 100,000, all right, but, and that's the scale of the map. But you want to have the proper scale of the map. You want to have proper map symbols. In my lifetime, I got accustomed, excuse me for coughing, in my lifetime, I got accustomed to military grid reference system maps, because they're very accurate, but they also change. You got to remember, and be aware of when was your map made to, and understand the legends of your map, and make sure that this is the most current map that is put out. Typically, you want to keep your map to within, a year to 3 years. Anything older than that, expect some changes in the terrain. These changes can be natural or man-made changes. You just never know. There could have been a road put in there that wasn't there before, all right? And you wouldn't know about it because you're using an old map. But had you had the current map, you would know there was a road there. You could have hopped on the road and walked straight to safety. See my point? So keep a current map with you, or look for the current map before you venture out. But a lot of times you're not going to have a map on you when you're lost and stranded. And so you need to maybe develop the ability to take notes. Keep a notepad on you. Keep a pen on you. You should always have a notepad and pen on you anyway. But especially if you're going out into the wilderness to explore, backpack, and hike, keep a notepad and pen on you in case you have to draw a hasty map with, little symbols for terrain, association. So you got the mountaintop over here, and you're drawing it based off of what you look at. It's like you took a photograph in your brain, and you're taking it and putting it down onto your little notepad. So we got mountaintop over here, lake down over here, and so that way you can kind of line yourself up with what you see with your eyes and put that on paper, and then use that as like a little hasty patrol map, okay, or a sector sketch. In the military, we call those sector sketches, and basically we use those to kind of give an idea of threat points for enemy stuff. But in the real world, you can use a sector sketch to help save your life, because it basically becomes a patrol map. Patrol maps are very important because you can't remember everything, especially when you're focused on so many other things, but you do want to protect your patrol map. So I would highly recommend that you get a waterproof pen and waterproof paper, and that way when you write on it, it's not going to smear. And two, you can keep writing on it even if it got a little bit wet. So to find your way out, you're going to take all these little skill sets that you've developed. Get on the internet and look up YouTube about land navigation, map reading, terrain association. Get outside with a group of your friends and go put to practice before your excursion. And practice with map reading. Practice with terrain association. Look in your group and see who is there that is a military veteran that has gone to map reading, land navigation courses through either basic training or even took some advanced stuff, or but somebody that has the ability to read maps and maybe give you guys a quick little class in case your parties ever got separated. Doesn't matter if you're an adult, doesn't matter if you're a child, everybody should know how to read a map, everybody should know how to read a compass, everybody should know the different ways of reading a compass. So I challenge you to get on YouTube and look up compass reading. There's the cheek method, and there's, gotta remember compasses are affected by metal, so if you're using a compass, you want to remove watches and jewelry, but by doing so, you'll get a more accurate reading on your compass, and it's less effective. Also, you got to gauge your compass too. If you're going to use a compass, compare that compass to 3 other compasses, so that way you can see if it's giving you, the overall consensus of the same azimuth, same direction. Because you could take one compass, put it next to another one, and actually get kind of 2 different readings. So out of the 2, how do you know which one's giving you an accurate reading? Because some compasses are flawed. The flaw comes in manufacturing. We do that with military compasses that are radiac compasses, and to make sure that they're accurate, because sometimes they're not. So, and you can't always rely on digital. You cannot always rely on GPS, because GPS is signal impaired. So if you don't have a signal, whether you have a satellite uplink or not, GPS, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and now you're out of luck. So getting back to basics is your safety blanket. Primitive skills is your safety blanket. Then you have added technology like compasses. Then you have people that have watches with compass. I think the Sunto Core Black watch has a compass in it, and so and that's the watch that I use. But it has a compass in it, and you could use that, but you can't rely on that being totally accurate. You know, it's kind of like I use it just kind of like. I think that's north. Let's double check. Yeah, I'm getting a confirmation that that's north, but. I use digital devices more for confirmation. I don't necessarily want to put 100% hope in them. But you should get so good at your navigation skills and your cardinal direction finding that you basically could just look up at the sky and really tell, even on a cloudy day. But I have a method that I use to tell direction finding even on a cloudy day. And it's never not served its purpose for me, actually. You know, the thing with finding your way out of a wilderness survival situation is you can only travel safely during certain times, and you don't want to exert all your calorie intake when you don't need to. You want to preserve your energy. You want to leave time to find edible foods, animals, plants, and insects. You definitely want to intake water, but you want to make sure that your water is, treated. So boil it, filter it. People have these fancy filter straws. If you have one, use it. If you don't have that, boil it. Right, and if you can't boil because you don't have a pot or a pan, then you're going to have to become creative. And you're going to have to find something and make something. So the point that I want to make here is, since you're out there already, put your creative eyeglasses on. Everything you look at, be creative at. Wow, I could use that as a chopping instrument. I can use that as a club. I could probably make a bow and arrow out of that. Oh, I could use that for my fire tinder. Oh, I could use that for shelter construction. That would be a knife. If I could just chip it off a flake, I could turn that flake into a knife blade, and that would be a nice knife handle for it. And I see some vines over here that I could use for twine to hold the knife blade to the knife handle. So have that creative, open vision on your eyes when you're out there. Everything you're looking at, you're trying to turn into a tool. Tools make life simple. So, since you're out there, make everything a tool. Everything there is there to help you to sustain, to live, to see the next day. All right? Well, I've encouraged you to get onto YouTube and look up some videos about land navigation and map reading, the Terrain Association. So please do that. Encourage you to get onto the Daniel Shrigley Survival blog and look up some of the articles I've written about survival and also the psychology of survival. And I really think that if you stop for a moment when you find yourself critical and you do some form of a meditation and don't let yourself become fearful, you basically, in essence, just saved your life right there. I believe that. Okay? Everybody has instincts to survive. If you don't know what something is, don't put it in your mouth. If you're not 100% sure, don't put it in your mouth. All right? It's better for you to eat an insect that you don't know what it is, except for spiders, all right? Or centipedes, all right? But if it's a beetle, eat it. Flies, stay away from flies. Never put flies in your mouth. Remember in the survival situations, fingers, flies, food, fecal matter, and fluid. You want to avoid or stay sanitized with those things. So we avoid flies. We don't avoid fluid, but we want to make sure we treat fluid. So fingers, flies, fluid, fecal matter, and food. Those are things that either have to be clean or avoided. So those are the 5 F's, okay? So when we come to a plateau to where we realize that we are lost, we've used critical skills, we've done direction finding, and that you are headed in the right direction, remember the other thing is your safety comes first. Protect yourself from the elements. Build your shelter. All right? Whatever your challenge is, you have to counteract that challenge. So survival is really less complicated than anybody could ever imagine it is. It's really simple. Whatever you're afflicted by, you just build the thing that counters it. So if you're afflicted by a running river, you build a flotation device. All right? If you're afflicted by wind, you build a wind barrier. If you're afflicted by sun, you build a sunshade. If you're very cold and need to stay warm, you build a fire and maybe a shelter. If you're afflicted by rain, you build something to keep you dry. So survival is not complicated at all. All right? Just think. Before we were a civilization as we are today, we came from where? All right? The settlers travel across our lands. All right? And in the United States, we had the frontier. People got on horseback and they rode for 6 months to get from one place to the next. So survival is less complicated. Put in your brain that you're a frontiersman, that you're crossing the plains, and I promise you, it makes it more simplistic. All right? You don't have to be an Einstein to survive. You just have to be smart, and you have to not let fear control you. I promise you, as you're surviving out there in the wilderness, you're not going to have a tribe of Indians coming to scalp you. So you don't have to worry about that like back in the old days, in the frontier days. All you have to do is keep food in your belly, water in your belly, and prevent yourself from being afflicted by the elements that you're encompassing. If you're cold, get warm. If you're hot, cool down. All right? Don't press your body so much that don't press your body so much that you're defeating your feet in your hands. That means don't walk so hard that you're getting blisters. And don't use your hands without protecting them. So be alert, be aware, stay alive. This is Dan Shrigley. Thank you for listening in.
You're listening to Daniel W. Shrigley's Survival Talk Radio, the official survival talk radio of America's Survival Son. Come and learn survival.
Daniel Shrigley, America's Survival Son. Daniel Shrigley, America's Survival Song. Daniel Shrigley, surviving against the odds. Daniel Shrigley, America's Survival Song. America's Survival Song. America's Survival Song. America's Survival Son. Survive this.
To feel her wind blow across my face, I wanted to see her beautiful northern lights. I wanted to know if there was a reason to love a place snow and glaciers that melt into tears. She calls me back home and lays like a beauty upon her bed of ice. This cold Arctic mistress
been a Dan Shrigley broadcast. Please tune into our website at www.danielshrigley.com. Thank you for listening to today's